Good morning, everyone, and thank you for dialing in to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about becoming a subject matter expert. And to give you guys a little bit of perspective, we'd like to start off with this particular topic because it really sets the framework as to which talent sourcing method is actually going to work best for you. So that's why we're sort of starting here today. We've got a series of 3 events that we'll be hosting throughout the day. If you can't make all of them, don't be too concerned. When we give you your follow-up notes tomorrow, we'll send you through a copy of this presentation, also links to all 3 of the recordings as well. So I hope you can join us throughout the day. I know it's a lot of time out of one day, but let's see how we go. Now, for those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Narelle Stefanak. I'm the National Client Training Manager at Seek, and I cover both Seek Australia and Seek New Zealand. So I often get over to New Zealand a couple of times a year and host live events. And we've run this event in particular back in early June in Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. So we're just breaking it into 3 components and delivering it as a webcast for anyone who could have missed it or just lives more regionally and just couldn't make it to the location. So really hope you enjoy today's session. My background before joining Seek, I worked in the recruitment industry as well. So if you've got any questions for me today, I really do want you to fire them at me. We're going to be on the line for about an hour. And we might finish a little bit early, just depends on how many questions we actually have. But if you do want to pose your questions today, I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's a series of 3 events that we're running. So this first one about becoming a subject matter expert is really about how do you get the information you need so that you can influence both hiring managers and candidates so that when you take the job brief and when you're going through and executing the recruitment strategy that you choose, that it actually works. It's seamless, it's fast, and you know what the marketplace is going to be like in terms of how does your industry compare to other industries? Is the market growing? Is it shrinking? Are you going to have difficulties around particular occupational groups just because of the roles that they're in and the sheer supply and demand for talent? So we want to be able to give you direction on how you can go and get this information out of the open marketplace, but also what's data that you can use from Seek in a real-time supply and demand pressure point. So you can really sort of start to push your hiring managers around a little bit. Often they might not have hired for, say, 5 years or so, and they often think that's just going to be the same process that they've always done. But the reality is that the market's moving so quickly that doing what you've always done isn't necessarily going to get you the best result or the best candidate. So if you really want to tighten up the sorts of candidates that you're having either apply to your roles or the quality of the talent that you're actually reaching out to, there's a lot of things that we can sort of sharpen at the front end when we're taking the job brief itself. So we're going to talk about that. The other 2 topics is once you've decided on the best sourcing strategy, which is either advertise or search for talent, usually most of the time. So do you do one? Do you do both? Do you do a combination? Thinking about what's the best sourcing strategy is going to work. But for right now, we're going to hone in on this whole, how do you become a subject matter expert? Because often what happens is that there's a lot of data out there and there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of information that you can find about the employment marketplace and about different jobs and what's happening, but you don't necessarily know what to do. So if you guys want to ask questions throughout today's session, what I want you to do is type them in for me. We've got about 50 of you on the line at the moment and a few more may dial in just a little bit late, but I'd rather you guys type them in because it just gives me the opportunity to sort of pause between screens and answer them as we go. I'll also park a couple of minutes at the end to answer any additional questions as well. Now, we've got a whole heap of handouts as well for you, so you might find that in your little toolbox, when you click on that little red area, little red button with the white arrow on it, it'll open up this toolbox area with the handouts, and there's 5 handouts for today. Now, you don't need to download all of them. The links to the handouts will actually be in the presentation itself as well, so you'll receive these tomorrow. But if you can see it in your toolbox and you've got this little drop-down area, you'll see that there's 5 different ones that you can download. Just download the ones that may be relevant for you. So we have some industry insights at a national level. We have industry insights for Auckland, Wellington, and Canterbury. So you'll see the little abbreviations on those drop downs of the handouts. And then we also have the full presentation. So at any stage during today's session, you can just drop on those and download them as you wish. All right, let's get stuck into things. Look, if you guys can walk away from this session and feel like you know where to go in a split second when you're taking a job brief to be able to better inform the hiring manager on how easy or difficult it may be to resource for a role, then I'm going to be super happy. Because often what happens is we jump straight into the job briefing process. A hiring manager will say, well, Mary's just resigned and we need to replace Mary. So I need X, Y, and Z. And straight away we're taking down the brief. And I guess the real danger with that is that we don't take any time to qualify how easy or difficult it might be, and therefore inform and advise the hiring manager as a result. We can go a bit off gut feel, and I know a lot of people do go off their gut feel, but there's a lot of data out there to back up your gut feel. So the important part about data is that you don't just collect it, because there's so much out there. If you get an Excel spreadsheet or a graph and you just send it through to the hiring manager, there's no thought put into it. So there's no real insight. They'll just look at it and go, oh, that's interesting. And then they park it and throw it away. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a lot about data and how do you actually move I guess the rawness of the data and turn it into really powerful messages that can help influence the way that you go about talent sourcing. Because I guess the danger is that if you take data and you don't take the time to message it appropriately, you're not actually positioning yourself as a subject matter expert. You're just farming information out. So we want to make sure that when we're talking to our hiring managers, we're seen as a trusted advisor. And as a trusted advisor, you need to be able to get data, break it down into something that's very, very simple, and then convert it into a compelling message that is understood. Because if you can't do that, they just won't believe you. They won't think you understand it well enough, and they won't see you as that expert. So you're not really moving the dial. So this is what we're really going to aim for today. This is what we're gunning at. We're going to try and break it apart, find lots of complex data, find the nuggets of gold, and then break it out into really powerful messages so we can start shaping the way that we go about our talent sourcing strategies. All right, so I'm going to ask you guys, I've been talking long enough now, I'm going to throw a poll up on your screen, and I want to know, how do you go about getting employment data and insights at the moment? And there's lots of different ways. You can choose as many as you wish, but maybe you don't collect data at all about the employment marketplace. Maybe you use government sites like NZ Stats or MBIE or a range of different ones. A lot of people use social, where they might go to Twitter to look for information. They might look for white papers. Maybe they use Facebook, a whole range of different sources. Seek supplies industry insight data, so you might be using that, or you might be paying for reports. So there's a number of different companies that do market reports, which is more industry specific, and within that there's some employment data in there as well. So just indicate which ones suit you. We've got half the votes in so far, so depending on how you guys respond will depend on how I sort of shape the rest of the content, but we'll see what you guys come up with. All right, most of the votes are in. I'm going to close that off in a second. Give you 2 more seconds. Hurry up and vote quick. Okay, I'm going to close that. I'm going to show you what the results are. So a lot of you, more than half of you, are using Seek data, which is great. It's fantastic that you guys are using this at the moment. We're going to talk about it in one component in a moment, but the other thing that we're going to talk about is some independent data. So where can you actually go? So government sites like the NZ Stats, the MBIE, not only where you can go and get it, but how do you compile it? How do you pull it together? And I'll navigate my way through and I'll show you what I do with it, really to get my head around the New Zealand market as quickly as possible. Because a number of you may specialise in a particular industry, and if so, fantastic. You can absolutely become a guru in your vertical. But often when I come to New Zealand, there's a lot of people, whether they're recruiters or internal hirers, they have to recruit across every role. And it's very difficult to become the subject matter expert of the world, okay, of every single discipline. So I'm going to give you some advice and some direction on how you can sort of get to that point and at least become very knowledgeable around every single requirement that you may have for the business that you're recruiting for. There's about a quarter of you that just aren't using data at all at the moment. So this will be a nice little way to get in there and work out, okay, well, what can we use? What's available to me? Because a lot of the time we say we don't use data because it's just all too hard, too overwhelming, too much. And what do I actually do with it in the end anyway? It's just a waste of time. So I'm going to show you how you use it. All right, let's hide that and let's get back into the session. So I'm just going to make sure that I come back up on your screen. Let's have a look. Yep, you're back on my PowerPoint. So there's a few sources that you can use. And it depends on whether you want to pay for them or not. I'm not going to talk about paid sources. There's lots of different ones you can use. I've thrown Euromonitor up there as an additional one as well. So I spoke before about paid companies like PwC, KPMG, those sorts of guys will do industry reports. But Euromonitor is interesting if you're an international business, or if you're looking at emerging trends that are coming out of, say Southeast Asia or that sort of thing. So it can give you, I guess, a bigger perspective around what's going on in the market. But I'd probably only pay for reports if you're more in a senior level position where you need to do more the strategic thinking for the business. As a person who's recruiting within your role, you may not necessarily need that depth. You need to know more just specifically about the employment industry, not necessarily about, what's the size of the market, who has the most market share, what are the environmental impacts that could potentially impede on that business or that industry. That it's a lot more strategic in those paid reports. So the ones that I like are Insight, which is ours. Okay, it's a blog, but it's just insight.seek.co.nz. So it's a Kiwi blog that we post articles to. So we have lots of different articles. Some of them are industry specific, and often we'll attach reports in there, links to reports. So I'd go to that blog, just keep an eye on it. We upload content, a couple of pieces each month. It's not overwhelming. We don't just blog every single second of the day. We want to make sure that the stuff that's going through there is really meaningful. So have a look through it, see if there's anything in there that's of interest to you. The other ones that I like are this MBIE and other associated websites that use their data, and also NZ Stats is a great little source as well. So these ones I'm going to sort of talk to a little bit because they give you really good macro trends in terms of what's happening across the country, across all industries. And understanding what's happening in your country as a whole is a really good thing to have in a snapshot, because then you can compare what you're trying to do in comparison to the national average. And I think that comparative point, you can say, well, this is going to be harder for us because we've got a high growth projection, whereas the national average is at the marketplace is actually going to soften in terms of growth. So we've got a conflicting problem. So if we are trying to look for an administrator, fine, that might fall into the national norm or the national average. But if we're looking for someone in the aged care sector, which is in a huge growth mode, we're going to have an issue. So we want to be able to give you that comparative point, because it's when you can use those comparisons that you can start to have a lot more leverage with hiring managers. So the first thing we're going to break out is looking at these macro employment trends. And I'm not just going to give you the answers, I'm actually going to show you the websites and how to navigate through them and find the information for yourself, because we're doing this session now, but I want you to be able to go back to these sites regularly. Go back in. There's a few of them that update quarterly, some of them update annually. So we want to make sure that you have access whenever you need it and you know where to go. So the first one that I like at a very macro level is this quarterly labour market report. And the quarterly labour market report is great because there's a lot of detail in there. It talks a lot about GDP and what the growth and what the state of the market is, what's in growth, what's in decline by industry. So it sort of gets your head in the right space. It's a very detailed report though, and I don't spend all my time reading the entire report. I look for things. So I'm going to show you what I look for. I'm going to clip out to the World Wide Web, which should come up on your screen very shortly. Here it goes. So ultimately in here, what I'm looking for is the latest report, which is this one here, May 2015. And when I click on it, it'll open up a PDF for me. And you can save it if you wish, you can print it out. But there's lots of information in here. And as I scroll through the report, I'm going to scroll through it. It's going to be a little bit delayed on your screen, but I'm going to scroll through it. And because there's a lot of pages, I don't want to go through everything. It gives you a top line snapshot of the employment rate and how it's changed in the country as well. So it gives you good sort of people figures. It gives you some stats on the economic conditions, and you can see as it comes up, next one, there we go, when GFC hit, right? So you can sort of see that trending, and what is interesting is the rebound off the back of that. So there's been really strong growth post GFC, and now it's going to start to mediate. It's not going to be quite as strong moving forward. It'll still grow. It's still in growth mode. It's just not at the same rate, which you could imagine because a lot of businesses laid off a lot of people during GFC, and then they needed to come back again. And so as their businesses normalized or rebounded, they've had to overhire, and now they're sort of going more into a custom sort of hiring pattern. The one that I like though, I'm going to get to it down on page 7, I think it is. Page 6, here we go. So employment growth by industry. I really like this one, and I know these little graphs are going to be small on your screen, but I really like this one because it gives you a visual over what's happening in the industry. And this can tell a really good story. It's a 10-year trend, and it helps you get your head around, okay, well, what's going on and why? Some of these industries are really small, so the spikes are going to be bigger or smaller as a result. But manufacturing, you can see that's been in constant decline for the last 10 years. It's actually plateaued out, and it's had a little bit of a rebound recently, but it's still well below where it was 10 years ago. And a lot of that's because a lot of stuff's being offshored, but we will see localized sort of food industry and manufacturing within that space that will remain local. And as those businesses continue to thrive, there'll be a little bit more demand in that space. But there's some really big movers and shakers, you know, construction, business services, health services, education. There's a lot of stuff that's been in growth mode for a very long time and is sort of bucking the trend of what a lot of other industries are doing. So we want to understand those. We want to understand why that's occurring. And there's a lot of commentary in this report as well, which is helpful to read, but I've summed it up for you. So I'm going to click back to the presentation. And I've just made a few slides, call-out slides for you, just to get your head around, well, what's actually going on in New Zealand at a top level. So one of the fastest growing industries in New Zealand is healthcare. I don't think it's number 1 from memory. I think it's number 3, but it's a massive growth area, and there's a huge amount of people employed in this category, and it's because we're getting older. Right? I started at Seek 11 years ago. I feel a lot older today, but we're all getting older. We're working longer. We're living longer. But as a result, there's a lot more pressure on healthcare and aged care at the very top end. The other part that's putting pressure in this industry is the bottom end. So a lot more women returning to the workforce when they've got young families. So there's more need and more demand for childcare services. So we're starting to see pressure at both ends, and that is expected to continue. This is the one area where if you're recruiting in the healthcare space, you're going to have to be on your toes because you're going to far outpace the majority of the industries across New Zealand, and you're going to be competing for talent. So whatever flexibility you can get from hiring managers is going to be key. So the way I'd be using this is probably more longer term conversations with hiring managers. You know what? The long-term trend is that there's been significant growth in this industry over the last 10 years, and it's not going to stop. We're going to continue to have pressure points. So whatever we were doing 5 years ago is not going to work 5 years from now. So we need to identify what our barriers are and get rid of them. Do we ask for selection criteria? Why are we doing that? Do we need to do that? Are we asking for cover letters? Are we putting barriers in front of them? Are we just waiting for candidates to apply to us? Are we proactively building out talent pipelines? What are we doing here? Because we really need to fundamentally shift the way that we go about finding, growing, and employing this talent in our business. So I'd be having these big level conversations in the planning piece. The next one is business services. So we definitely see this across both New Zealand and Australia as well. Technical services, we're becoming more of a global economy. There's a lot of technology. When we look at the sheer volume of ads on our site, the number 1 industry is IT, except for in Canterbury region, that's trades and services, but IT is still up there. So this is a really big sector for New Zealand. A lot of professional services, there'll be more pressure on trying to find highly skilled talent and being able to tempt them from one job to the next. So how do you go about doing that? How do you position yourself as a premium employer? How do you use the best technology, the best services, the greatest efficiency? So really looking at how do we promote those sorts of things out to candidates over the longer term and really build our brand presence as an employer of choice. Construction sector, this is interesting. This is going to be the strongest growth area for New Zealand, even though we've been out of sort of that real danger period for the Canterbury earthquake, so all through Christchurch and stuff back in 2010, tail end of 2010, and then rolling into 2011. there's been a lot of work not only in Canterbury but also in Auckland and across the country because with all of the building codes needing to be revised, it's put a lot more pressure back into this industry as well. And there's a lot more residential growth. So as the population continues to grow, there's going to be more pressure on construction in a residential and commercial sense. So this industry is going to continue to fuel, and again, it's going to become difficult. If you think it's difficult to find good people now, it's only going to get harder. So having a localized strategy, is that going to be enough? Do we have to have a global strategy? How do we get talent? How do we get them to want to even move to New Zealand to be able to perform these roles? Because a lot of these roles do sit on your skilled migration list. So what are the top 5 industries? We were talking about construction, hospitality, so all your accommodation services, private services, which is more of those business services and private business opportunities, public services, which is more your government sector out of, say, Wellington and other areas, and then the healthcare and education. These are your big ones that are going to grow faster. And to give you some perspective, I mean, 2% and 4%, they don't sound like big numbers, right? But this is an annual increase projection. So over that time period, it's been growing previously at about 2.1, 2.3% over the last 2 years, year on year. In New Zealand, they're expecting it to steady at about 2%. So if you're recruiting in construction, well, you're more than double the national average in terms of growth rate. And in hospitality, you're close to double the national growth rate. So it's going to be twice as hard for you guys to be able to recruit in that space. And sometimes these big figures can really help set the scene for hiring managers. So being able to say, you know what, we're in the construction industry, it is more than double, it's like 250% more difficult to recruit in this particular industry than the national average. So we need to start planning. We need to change the way we've always done things. And that's the main thing that we want to do. We want to get hiring managers and businesses to start thinking about what do they need to be planning for? What could they be doing to be smartening up the way that they've always done things? Now, the other thing that I like, so that's very much a strategic planning, thinking, how do we compare if we're in this industry and we're not in that industry, how are we going to be impacted? That's great, gives you a really good mindset at the top level. But when you have a job, being called through on the phone from a hiring manager, you sort of need to do something about it right then and there. And when I was going through New Zealand, a lot of people said they recruit across every role. So in that instance, it's very difficult to necessarily be the subject matter expert and advising the hiring manager, who's obviously a specialist in their space, on what that role should look like. However, they have an assumption that they should just be able to flick the role to you and now it's your responsibility. So we want to sort of catch them in their breath when they're giving you that brief. And we really want to challenge, okay, is this really what you're looking for? And did you know that this is happening in the industry? So we need to think about it this way. So I'm going to show you what I use. This portal called careers.gov.nz, so it's the Careers NZ portal. It's great. It has a jobs database with over 400 occupations, and they're clustered by industry group. And it's so easy to navigate. So I'm just going to, oops, I've clicked through to the wrong one. I'm going to show you how to navigate it. I want to make sure you guys are back up on my screen before I start. Let's see, it's thinking. There we go. So you can keyword search, right? You can type in here, say you're looking for an electrician, and you can start typing it, and it has this sort of query intent. It understands that you may be looking for something with electrician in it, and so it starts populating all of the different types of roles. So that's great. You could choose it that way. Let's say you wanted to go down to, let's say you wanted to go to health and community, because that's a big sector, and we go to health, then it gives you all of the different roles that sit within there. And they break them out in terms of level of role. So they start at the sort of core base level, which is a trade or certificate or no qualification. Then they go to diploma, then they go to degree. And then on the right-hand side, they tell you, this is from a candidate's perspective, how easy or difficult it might be to find a job, right? So if you are looking for a clinical coder, it's pretty average. Okay, so the supply of talent and the demand for talent is pretty good. It's fairly balanced. So your opportunities of getting a role are good as long as you apply yourself. If you're a dispensing optician, I haven't said that word before, so hopefully I said it correctly. But if you're a dispensing optician, then your chances of getting a job are good. Why? Because there is more demand for candidates than there are candidates available for those roles. So you as a hirer need to think about, if the demand is good, that means it's bad for you. It means you're going to have to move faster. You're going to need to work harder. You're going to have to offer more. You're going to have to think creatively. You're going to have to make sure if you're going to write an ad, it's executed exceptionally well. If you're going to talent search for talent, you may need to be more flexible. Would you take someone locally? Would you go interstate or into region or overseas? Where would you actually go for that talent? So it's a nice little indicator just at this grassroots. The other thing that I love about it is that it tells you a lot about the role. So I'll go to a role that's fairly common. Let's say a paramedic. Okay. As a paramedic, it gives you a bit of a snapshot of what the role is, how it's grown, what to expect. So on average, they earn between 58K to 72K, and then they tell you where they get this information from, which is neat, right? Because if you ever want to do some more research, if you specialize in this area, go and research Wellington Free Ambulance. They probably do reports all the time. The other part that they look at is this year-on-year growth. So we've gone up to 1593. It's fairly steady. I wouldn't say that's a really strong growing category. It's just gone up by close to 20 people, so 15 odd people, and where they source that information from as well. But they do tell you that the opportunities for candidates is good. So that means it's going to be hard to find these candidates. I want to know why. So if you click on this job opportunities, it'll tell you why. Chances of getting a job as a paramedic are good due to strong demand for people qualified to fill the role. And then it tells you about the growth. Because not only people what does it say? Demand for paramedics is strong because not enough people qualify each year to fill available vacancies. So there's not enough people studying, and there's not enough people getting qualified, but there's an ongoing demand. So the demand may be from replacements, so people exiting the industry, or it could be through growth, but there's just sheerly not enough people studying this discipline to be able to fulfill the need. So that's how you sort of have the conversation with your hiring manager. You know what? There hasn't been much growth in this segment. However, people are exiting the industry and there's not enough people studying in here to be able to replace them. So we're going to find it really difficult. If we are going to get someone, we're probably going to have to poach them from another employer. Otherwise, we may need to think about a graduate strategy. Would you take a graduate? Do they have to be experienced? Because these guys are going to be really difficult to source. So you can start to see just with little snippets of narration, it can help you. The other thing is, if you're either new to the recruitment industry, which I know some of you are, it's your first time in recruitment, and also if you're hiring this role for the first time, you don't really know that much about it. The good thing that I like about this website is that they have the About the Job section. And if you click About the Job, it tells you the key tasks of the role. So if you're speaking to the hiring manager, you can ask them, do you want them to attend medical emergencies and deal with traumatic injuries? Yes, we do. Do you want them to treat ill and injured people at accident or emergency scenes? Yeah, we do. So you can start to build your knowledge and qualify with the hiring manager at the same time. If you don't have position descriptions in your business and you work in the HR team, this is where you'd start building them, right? You grab all of this information, put it into a position description, start farming it out to your hiring managers and say, I need you to sign off on these and add to them, right? And then you can start building your base of knowledge at a time when you have a slower period. Okay, I know, when do we ever have slower periods, but maybe over Christmas, maybe if there's a quiet time, then this is a really quick way of just copying, pasting, building out those PDs that you may not have in your business at the moment. So this is how I want you to start thinking about using this information. It can be really, really powerful. They update their data usually every 12 to 18 months. It takes a long time. There's 400 occupations. There's a lot of information to collate. So this has only just been released in the last sort of 3 months. I dare say the next cut of data probably won't come through till about May next year. But you come in, use the portal, move around. There's lots of information in here. Just bear in mind that it's targeted to candidates. So you need to put your hiring hat on and think, okay, if it's good for candidates, that's probably bad for us. So just put that extra lens over the top of it. All right, so I'm going to move back to the presentation because they're the main things I wanted to cover with the external data that you can get access to whenever you want. And what I've done is I've put these hyperlinks in as well on each of the page. So when you get the presentation at the end, or if you download it out of the handouts now, you can click on these and it will take you through to that information. All right, so how do you then overlay SEEK data to position yourself as the subject matter expert? Because what SEEK data is sort of real-time data. We publish this every month. So ultimately, you can get more up-to-date insight around not only we don't do the longer-term trend. You can go to market to get that, and we can produce some longer-term trending as well. We go back 5 years. I haven't included it in here because I think there's enough information out there. What I want to give you is this sort of real-time speed to market. Are candidates going to be easy to find through a job ad? Yes or no? If no, what do I do about it? So the first thing that we really want to address is this whole candidate supply and demand. Okay, we may have a projection that opportunities for candidates are good. Okay, that means it's going to be more difficult for us. But what does it actually mean when we break it down to a granular level if we're going to advertise? So I'm going to show you how we measure that and how you actually read it, how you interpret it, what you do with it. Then you need to qualify how competitive am I going to be. So through the salary offerings, you can actually start to break apart, well, we've got a great job, but we're paying 40 grand less than the market average. That's going to probably be an issue for us. So what do we do about it? So I wanted to give you some insights as to how competitive you are. The other part is candidate behaviour. So if you do choose to advertise, because on Seek, if you're not attending the talent search session or you haven't done talent search before, when you post an ad with Seek, you have access to our talent search platform and it's free. So if you're not doing both, I'd really question, is that the best approach? And really start to rethink, okay, maybe advertising alone is not the answer. Maybe I need to do advertising and searching, or maybe just searching for talent is a better way for me to go. But we'll talk more about that in the third session today. So what I'm going to show you here is if you are advertising, what are candidates physically doing on our site, so you understand their behaviour so you can get the best possible results. All right, so the way I'm going to do this is we've got 30 different classifications across Seek. We've got lots of different areas, and I wanted to really just give you an example of how you would read and interpret the data that you're going to have in your handouts, because all of them are cut. So we've got, if you're looking at New Zealand across the whole, which is great, this is what I'm going to show you now. And I'm just going to drill in on the IT sector, so the ICT area. And if this isn't relevant to you, you can get your own one out of the handouts and go, okay, that's how I apply it to me. And I'm in healthcare and I know that I'm looking for assistance in nursing are really difficult. I can see that. And so you can start to work out the same sort of messaging, but I'll go through it and give you an example of how it comes together. So the reason why I've chosen IT is because across Auckland and Wellington, it's the #1 industry. In Canterbury, it's trades and services. So Christchurch guys, I apologise, or Canterbury region guys, I apologise, but you will have access to trades and services. Also across the country, there's over 2,200 roles listed at any given time in this category, and it's the most amount of ads that we have. So it should be beneficial to a large proportion of you. Now, the thing that we are going to look at first is supply and demand. And this is easy for us to measure because we see the supply of talent. We know how many people have a relationship with us. We know how many of them are searching for roles by classification, by subclassification, by location. We know how many of them are physically clicking on summaries and moving through to the detail of the ads, how many are reading those ads, how many are clicking on the apply button and going through the process. So we can monitor it all the way through, and we can give you extra data if any of those steps are important to you. But the one that's really important is the ratio between when someone's physically looking at your ad and then chooses to apply. Because what that does is it gives us a really good cross-section of supply and demand, because it's not just the job ad itself and it's not just the searching candidate that could be active or passive, but it's actually the one that shows intent to want that role. And if you're going to run an ad, you sort of want to know if you're going to get a good response or not. So in terms of giving you supply and demand data, I'm going to give you this graph, which is an average applications per ad index. Now, if you look from left to right, what you see is from lowest to highest volume of applications per ad, it's on an index with no numbers. So we take the numbers off because we don't publish the actual average applications per ad for competitive reasons, but we do, it's still scalable. So it's all relative. The top three that are most difficult to resource, just sheerly because it gets the lowest average applications per ad, we're talking about computer operators, architects, and team leaders. Now, computer operators, I sort of understand because they're becoming null and void, right? They're sort of becoming redundant. They're not necessarily out there. There's very few of them and there's very little demand for them. So I do expect that that will sort of sit there for a little bit in one of the top three. Architects, and if you're recruiting for architects, you know it's hard. So then team leaders are also really difficult. But to be fair, I'd say it's difficult probably all the way up until about here, engineering networks, like there's not much difference between architects and management. So if you're recruiting in any of these streams, it could be quite difficult for you. Then it sort of moderates right through, and then help desk officers are super easy. So the way that I would be looking at this and talking to the hiring manager is, if you're looking for an architect, so the hiring manager says, right, I'm looking for an architect and I want someone tomorrow, then the first thing I'd be saying is, well, architects are the second most difficult role to resource for nationally. So how flexible are you going to be? And I'd push that back onto the hiring manager. Okay, just because they're giving you the job brief doesn't mean that you are solely accountable for making that placement. It is a joint effort. They should assume some responsibility as well. They need to be able to tell you at the job briefing process that they're going to be flexible in some ways. In what ways? What does it look like? Okay, because if we're looking for an architect and I can't find them, it's going to be a market condition, not a me problem, because I'm really good at what I do. It's going to be a market issue. So we need to understand how flexible you're going to be. If we know they're the second most difficult role to resource for nationally, I need you to, as soon as I find someone, I need you to interview them. Can you do that? Do you have any restrictions in your diary that will prevent me from getting a candidate in front of you within 24 hours? If you do, let's look at interview times right now. So being able to get them up to speed so they move quickly, because there's nothing worse than finding the perfect candidate and then the client just not moving quickly enough and you lose them because they go somewhere else. The other thing I'd be thinking at the back of my mind is, you know what, a job ad probably won't work in isolation. Okay, it might. We're going to get very low applications. So would we just run with an ad? Or should we be proactively searching for talent as well? And I would be. I'd be doing both because it's a really difficult market. There's high competition for these candidates. Now, on the flip side, when you're looking at your help desk officers, I'd probably be saying, what sort of screening criteria could we put in? And even asking the hiring manager, okay, tell me about your ideal candidate. What does that look like? Because we're going to have a little bit of room to move here. So tell me what your perfect candidate looks like, and then let's break it down a little bit so that we can work out the best strategy in terms of attracting the most relevant talent into your business. So that's what we're really looking for, using this as a lever to make the hiring managers more accountable. Because if you're looking for an architect and you're based in Canterbury, you may not be able to necessarily find the talent there. So you might have to say, well, would you consider someone from another region? Would you consider someone from another country? Tell me a little bit about what those flexibilities look like. The other thing that you need to qualify is, are we going to be competitive enough with our offering? And so we capture from you guys a minimum and maximum salary band every month. So every time you post your ads, we capture that and we find a midpoint. And these are the midpoints for IT. And you can see that architects are getting an average of 114,000. So if that's the case and the hiring manager is only willing to pay 90K, I'd be saying you're so far off the market rates that this is going to be extremely difficult. So you either need to move on salary, or we need to talk about why they would want to choose this role even though it is considerably less than what they could get somewhere else. So is there something that you offer? Do you do support study, extra study? Do you pay for that? Do you have healthcare subsidies? Do you do something? Do you have great parking facilities? Do you provide gym memberships? Are you just a great brand? And that's why people love to work with you. Do you have really good career development opportunities or work-life balance capabilities where they can start and finish at their own times? What is it that you do that gets people to say, I don't care that I'm going to have to negotiate down on my salary, but I know what I'm compromising for what I'm going to get back? So we need to make sure that, again, we push back on them. I had an executive recruiter in Sydney that said, you know what, Seek doesn't work for me. I'm looking for a project manager in construction. I've had the role up for 3 months and I haven't had any good candidates. We looked at the role and the ad itself was pretty good. They're an executive recruiter. They know how to write an ad. So I could give them some tips, but the reality is I probably only moved the dial marginally, not to the degree where they probably needed it to go. And I looked at everything. I just said, what money have you got on this? Because they didn't write what money was actually on it. And they were 40 grand below the salary offering for their marketplace, so for Sydney. But the lion's share of candidates were actually in Queensland and in Victoria and then Sydney. So there were more candidates in Queensland and Victoria. And if they were going to try and poach candidates from interstate, when I looked at the Queensland salary, they were 60 grand below the Queensland salary. I said, just stop working the role. You can't fill it. It's just not going to be achievable. You've been working it for 3 months and you're that far removed from what the national salary offerings are and also the localised offerings. You're just not going to fill it. You're taking the wrong order, or you need to get them to change. So that was basically what I would be advising businesses. And we've done it internally at Seek as well. And when we've talked about a role, and I said, you're sort of pitching for someone very, very senior, but very senior candidates get paid more. Is that really what you need? Do you really need someone at that level, or could we take someone at this level? Because this level, that salary aligns to. So it gives me power to be able to shift their thinking and get them to go, you know what, actually, as much as we would love to have that candidate because that'd be perfect for us, it's not going to be great for the candidate necessarily. And the one that would work best in an even balance is probably going to be dialed down a few notches. So think about it. Think about how you'd use this. Now, if you do decide that advertising is the best mechanism, you sort of want to know what they're doing. About 5 years ago, we launched a mobile site, and it was less than 1% of our traffic in New Zealand was via a mobile device back then, so not very long ago. Today, it is almost the dominant way, right? It's 53% is via a desktop now, and 47% of our traffic is now via a mobile device. Very soon it'll be over 50%. We expect by the end of this year, definitely over 50%. In Australia, it's already 59% of traffic, so the trend is there. What that means is that we need to be considerate of the mobile experience. Often when we create an ad, we're on a desktop computer or a laptop computer, so we have a full screen. A lot of candidates won't be viewing you that way. So definitely go in and experience the mobile experience for yourself, see what barriers exist there. If you want to do the advertising principles one, we do talk a lot about mobile in there, so join that session next at 1:30. But we really do need to start thinking about what is that journey for the candidate, right from them searching, finding, reading, applying. So even make sure that if you're checking out your ads, go through the application process. If for any reason it feels clunky and you have to pinch the screen or you physically can't attach your resume, you've got a problem that needs to be fixed. Speak to one of our Seek account managers. We have lots of integrated processes that can help optimize your mobile experience, and we don't charge anything for it. Some of them may take longer to build than others just simply because of the amount of customization you might have in your process, but it's really worthwhile experience to have that conversation. When candidates search, they use a combination of search methods. So sometimes they'll use location and classification. Sometimes they'll use keyword alone. Sometimes they'll use a combination of all three. But the really interesting part is that they are using keywords more. And as a result, we're finding that they typically will put in keywords that are very common or very generic, and they cluster up into 5 main categories. So we're talking about job titles, the level of the role, so the seniority of it, the industry or the skill that they're after, and even the work type. So are they part-time, contract, casual, work from home, those sorts of things as well. So we're starting to see these clusters form across all industries, and usually it's skewed towards role title for most industries. However, for IT, when we look at the top 20 keywords, we see that there's a mix. So there's job title, there's seniority, but it's heavily skewed towards skill. And that's because I might be a developer, but I'm a Java developer or I'm a .NET developer. And so I'm very specific and I will put in the skill set that I have. And that's what we need to be thinking about. A lot of recruiters who specialize in the IT space do this exceptionally well. A lot of businesses aren't as great as understanding the technical skills that need to go into their job posting. So just be really mindful of it because these are the sorts of languages that candidates are using. You know, I went out and saw Apple in Sydney, and they have a role called an at-home advisor. And this is a very challenging role for our system and for candidates because it's a help desk officer. But what they're looking for is a technical support person who is so highly skilled that they can actually work from home. So they actually call them an at-home advisor because they're based from home, whereas candidates don't think that way. The way that they think is that it would be a technical support officer and the benefit is work from home. So be really conscious about the way that you're thinking about your roles. Don't internalize them. Try and think about, well, what's the logic from a candidate's perspective? All right, so what we have for you, and if you haven't been able to download these handouts yet that are in the little handout section in your toolbox on your screen, we're going to email this presentation through to you, but there's hyperlinks. So if I hover over them, you'll see the little hyperlink pop up. And if you click on them, it'll just give you the industry insights for those locations. Okay, so you can click on these, download them. What I'll show you they look like, I'll just open up the New Zealand one for you so you can get a bit of a sense of how they work. Yes, I trust you. Click in. So it's just downloading now. When you go in, you can go through, you can click on the hyperlinks. As long as your screen's full screen, it'll hyperlink right through to the correct page. But the way that I've done the graphs is in bars rather than columns, just so that it fits on the page and you don't have to twist your neck to read all of the titles. But it shows you the average applications per ad from lowest to high, or from highest to lowest. So I'm just going to make that a little bit smaller. And you can see that if you're looking for insolvency, treasury, taxation, really super hard to find candidates in that space. So that's the sort of thing that I'll be talking to hiring managers about. If you're looking at assistant accountants, bookkeeping, accounts officers, cost accounting, these ones you get a more significant volume of applications. You might want to use more screening capabilities here, or think about, you know, how do we actually approach the right candidates rather than just waiting for them to apply. Salaries are listed down this end, so from lowest to highest. And you can start to see what the averages are and are we going to be competitive or not. We also talk about the candidate behaviour, so how they typically search, which we've gone through, and then the top 20 keywords for those industries. And you start to see that they're really common: graduate, part-time accountant, accounting, accounts, really simple language. So thinking about that when you're building out your job ads. You don't have to list the keyword multiple times. It's not how candidates sort of think. And it's not how our algorithms work either. So if you want someone with, say, tax experience, right? So if a candidate types in the keyword tax, then what's going to happen is we look through all of the content of your ad to find the word tax. And we say, does the word tax exist, yes or no? We don't say how many times does it exist. We say, does it exist? And if it exists, we give it a tick and we give it a point. If it doesn't exist, it doesn't get a tick, it doesn't get a point. So there's no benefit. If you put it in 20 times, we still go, yes, it exists, 1 point. So don't feel like you have to keyword load. Our algorithms are smart enough to find the most appropriate ads. We also use a lot of candidate behavior. One thing candidates are doing is that by searching, sometimes we see not in the top 20 keywords, but in sort of the broader set, maybe top 50, top 100, they're starting to use locations, so really granular suburbs. So if your role, and you can publish where the suburb is that the role's located, just write it anywhere in your ad, because we'll actually use the fact that they've typed in the suburb, so maybe it's Dargaville, and we'll take that, we'll look through the ad, we'll find your ad and we'll push you towards the top, because we know that if someone's looking for a location, that outranks anything else. So we will push your ad towards the top if they've used isolation, the ad in isolate, the location in isolation. So we'll push them towards the top. So we do give extra boosters depending on how the candidate search and how you've written your ad. So just try and keep it as granular and specific as possible. But you guys will have all these to download, so please do play around with them. And when it comes through on the PDF, just hover over them, you just click on them and download them in case you haven't been able to download them today. So ultimately, I'm just going to wrap up and then open the floor for questions. So if you have any questions, start typing them now for me. But ultimately, I want you guys to walk away with a really good idea of how your industry compares to other industries as a national norm, and using that really big, broad data from MBIE, and also looking at the more granular data from Careers NZ. So are the roles that I typically recruit for, are they going to be more difficult or easier, and why? What do I know about them? How can I find that in a snapshot? If I'm hiring a new role that I've never recruited for before, how do I go about doing that? How do I make sure that I understand it, the hiring manager trusts me, that I understand the right language, the right terminology, getting the right information in so I can find and validate the right candidates on the way through? Because it's with that that you can position yourself as a trusted advisor. Then be able to make the most appropriate talent sourcing strategy decisions based on real-time supply and demand of candidates. How easy is this going to be? You know what? And push back on the hiring manager. You should be able to push them around a little bit, okay? Get them to take some accountability. It's not all up to you. And then you can sort of measure how competitive you're going to be through salary, and then think about, what is a candidate going to experience? What does that look like? How do I really shape that to get the best possible result? Because if you can do all of those things, what will happen is that you'll be able to have a much better planning process. You'll be able to think longer term about what you're going to do in your industry, who you're going to partner with, how you're going to provide insights and advice to them so that they will choose you every time to come to when they need advice. That when you take your job briefs, not only will they be robust, but you'll also be thinking ahead and thinking about, well, should I be booking in for interviews now so I can speed up the process? What should we be doing with our sourcing process if we know it's going to be hard to find? Should we put barriers in the way of applicants, or should we remove them? Should we go out and proactively search for them, or should we wait for them to come to us? So ultimately, if you can pull all of this together, if you can break down all that really complex data that you can find on the net, bring it back down to something that's really super simple, but then message it in a way that's compelling to hiring managers. That's how you're going to move the dial. That's how you're going to position yourself as a subject matter expert and really make a difference in your speed and quality of placements that you're making out in the marketplace. Guys, thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to open the floor for questions, and then I will wrap up. We've got one already. So Gurpreet has asked, I was part of the Advertising Principles webinar for your Australian clients. Is it relatively the same as the NZ webinar? Just want to know whether it's worth watching again. Yeah, don't worry, Gurpreet, it's fine. If you did the AU one, it's very similar to the NZ one. We have some NZ examples though. So when you get the follow-up notes this after, well, tomorrow it'll be now, just have a look at the NZ ones. There's a couple of NZ ads that I've rewritten, and those ones, they might be just more relevant to you. So have a look at those, but by and large, it's very similar. And also the mobile examples I use are just slightly different, but in essence, it's exactly the same content. Wonderful. Any other questions for today's session? If you do, type them in for me. Otherwise, I'm going to let you guys have an early mark. I'll give you guys a few minutes to get organised. Just lots of thank yous coming through. Fantastic. Let's see if there's any other questions in there. And Glennis has asked, can we watch the webinars later today due to other appointments? The webinars that will be done later today will also be recorded, and we'll send them through tomorrow. So you won't get them today, but you'll get them tomorrow, most likely late in the afternoon. It just takes a while for us to convert them to YouTube. So once we get them up and running, we'll shoot them through. Wonderful. I think that's it for today's session. Thank you so much for dialing in. I hope you found it valuable, and we'll be running our next session at 1:30. So I'll click back in an hour's time. Thanks, guys.